Eleanor Vance watched the rain. It was not a gentle, cleansing rain, but a furious, driven assault against the panoramic windows of her office on the 82nd floor. Each drop that struck the reinforced glass seemed to carry the weight of a judgment, a tiny hammer against the sterile fortress she had built around her life. Below, the city was a sprawling circuit board of blurred, indifferent lights. It was her city, her kingdom, built on a foundation of ruthless acquisitions and brutal efficiency. She was the queen of this cold, glass and steel realm, and she had never felt more alone. The silence in her office was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the climate control system and the storm's distant rage. A single document lay on the vast expanse of her obsidian desk, its stark white font and accusation. It was the final proposal for the Titan Tower project, her legacy, the monument that would etch the Vance name into the very skyline. There was only one obstacle remaining: a small, stubbornly persistent community clinic occupying a tiny parcel of the land she needed. The board had been clear. Their patience had evaporated. "Resolve it, Eleanor," Chairman Sterling had said, his voice like gravel scraping on steel. "Or we will find someone who can." It was an ultimatum, a threat veiled in the thinnest layer of corporate decorum. They saw a nuisance property. She was beginning to see a final test of her will. For weeks, her legal team had failed. The clinic, run by some sort of charitable trust, was protected by an ironclad charter. They couldn't be bought out or bullied by conventional means. Frustration, a bitter and unfamiliar taste, had soured her days and haunted her nights. A new strategy was required, a more personal, more predatory one. If they could not break the clinic from the outside, she would find the weakness within. She would go there herself, under a pretense, a false name. She would present herself as someone in need, observe their operations, and identify the pressure point, the greedy manager or disgruntled employee who could be turned. It felt beneath her, a sordid piece of corporate espionage, but desperation had stripped away her pride. She would become someone else for a day or two. Someone weak. Someone forgettable. The irony was a cold knot in her stomach. She already felt like that person on the inside. The next morning, the rain had softened to a fine, persistent mist that clung to the city in a gray shroud. Eleanor left her armored town car 3 blocks away from the clinic, the driver's confused expression a mirror of her own unease. She had swapped her tailored silk blouse and pencil skirt for a pair of generic jeans, a worn gray sweater, and a simple raincoat, clothes her assistant had procured with a discreet bewilderment. The clinic was a low, unassuming brick building, sandwiched between a laundromat and a boarded-up storefront. Its sign, the Meadowbrook Community Clinic, was hand-painted, the letters slightly faded. It looked less like an obstacle to a billion-dollar development and more like a place that had been forgotten by time. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, she was met not with the antiseptic smell of a hospital, but with the scent of chamomile tea, old books, and something vaguely like damp wool. The waiting room was small and crowded, filled with a quiet assortment of humanity. An elderly man coughed softly into a handkerchief. A young mother tried to soothe a crying baby. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a weary, inconsistent buzz. This was a world away from the silent, marble-floored lobbies of her life. Here, suffering was not an abstract concept on a charity gala invitation. It was a tangible presence, sitting in the chair right next to her. She took a number and sat down, feeling like an imposter, an alien studying a foreign species. A man emerged from a back room, calling a name. He wore simple blue scrubs, his dark hair was slightly tousled, and his face held a look of gentle exhaustion. He moved with a calm efficiency, his voice soft as he spoke to an anxious-looking woman. Eleanor watched him, cataloging him. He was the enemy, the face of the institution she had to dismantle. When her number was finally called, it was he who beckoned her. "Anna," she said, giving the false name she had chosen. Anna Smith. It felt clumsy and absurd on her tongue. "Right this way, Anna," he said, his smile genuine, without a hint of the transactional politeness she was used to. He led her to a small examination room. "I'm Thomas Reed, one of the nurses here. What can we help you with today?" She had rehearsed a story about persistent headaches, a plausible, untestable ailment. As she recited the fabricated symptoms, she watched him, looking for the telltale signs of weakness she was so adept at spotting. Greed, impatience, ambition. She saw none of them. He just listened, his focus entirely on her, his expression one of sincere concern. He took her blood pressure, his touch professional and unexpectedly gentle. "Your pressure is a little high," he said, making a note on a paper chart. "Could be stress. We can have Dr. Evans take a look, but it might just be you need to rest and drink some water. We have tea in the waiting room, if you'd like." As he spoke, a commotion erupted from the front of the clinic. A man's voice, raised in frantic anger, echoed down the short hallway. "What do you mean you can't fill it? My son needs this. It's his asthma medication." Thomas excused himself with a quiet apology and walked toward the sound. Eleanor, her mission momentarily forgotten, followed as far as the doorway, her curiosity piqued. A gaunt, desperate-looking man stood at the reception desk, waving a prescription slip. The receptionist, a harried-looking woman, was trying to explain that their pharmacy program had run out of that specific inhaler. "The shipment is late," the receptionist said, her voice strained. "I'm sorry, sir. We can give you a voucher for a pharmacy downtown, but it will only cover half the cost." "Half?" the man cried, his face crumbling. "Half is still more than I have. I have $7. "7? Do you understand?" Eleanor watched, a cold, analytical part of her brain assessing the scene. This was a leverage point. This was the sort of systemic failure her team could exploit, prove the clinic was mismanaged, and shut it down. But then she saw what Thomas did. He didn't argue or call for security. He stepped forward and placed a calming hand on the man's arm. "Let me see the script, Bill," he said softly. He knew the man's name. Thomas looked at the paper, then looked at the desperate father. He said nothing for a moment, then reached into his own pocket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. He took out a $20 bill and a 10 and quietly folded them into the man's hand. "Go to the pharmacy on Elm Street," Thomas said, his voice low enough that only the three of them could hear. "This will cover it. Don't worry about paying it back. Just make sure Michael feels better." The man, Bill, stared at the money, then at Thomas, his eyes filling with tears. He couldn't speak. He just nodded, a wave of profound, speechless gratitude washing over his face. He clutched the money and the prescription and hurried out of the clinic. Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway. She had just witnessed an act so fundamentally alien to her world that it felt like a distortion of reality. In her life, every transaction had a price. Every favor was a debt to be collected. Thomas had just given away his own money to a stranger, expecting nothing in return. He hadn't done it for show. He had actively tried to conceal it. He turned and saw her watching, a flicker of self-consciousness in his eyes before it was replaced by that same calm professionalism. "Sorry about that," he said, walking back toward her. "The system isn't perfect, but we do what we can." "You just gave him your money," Eleanor stated, the words coming out flat, incredulous. Thomas shrugged, a small, unassuming gesture. "He needed it more than I did. His son's health is more important than my lunch for a few days," he smiled faintly. "Now about those headaches." Eleanor couldn't focus. The carefully constructed artifice of her mission was cracking. She had come here expecting to find a weakness, a rot she could exploit. Instead, she had found an act of quiet, unyielding integrity. It confused her. It unnerved her. And a small, long-dormant part of her felt a flicker of something that felt dangerously like admiration. She left the clinic with a pamphlet on stress management and a profound sense of disorientation. The image of Thomas giving away his money was seared into her mind. It was a small act, insignificant in the grand scheme of her world of billion-dollar deals, but it felt more real and more substantial than anything she had experienced in years. Over the next few days, she found herself drawn back to the clinic. She told her team she was still gathering intelligence, but she knew she was lying. She was not a predator circling its prey anymore. She was an observer, a ghost watching a world she didn't understand. She sat in the waiting room, pretending to read a magazine, and watched Thomas. She saw him comfort a frightened elderly woman, make a child laugh with a simple magic trick he performed with a coin, and stay late to mop the floors himself when the janitor called in sick. Each act was a small, quiet testament to a decency she had thought was extinct. Her investigation took a different turn. Instead of digging for dirt on the clinic, She found herself digging into the life of Thomas Reed. It was easy. A simple background check, something her security chief handled with unquestioning efficiency, revealed his story. He was a widower. His wife, Sarah, had died 3 years prior from a rare form of cancer. They had insurance, but it wasn't enough to cover the experimental treatments that might have saved her. He had sold their house, liquidated every asset, and gone deep into debt, but it hadn't been enough. He had lost her, and he had lost everything else in the process. The report included a single, grainy photo of him and his wife. They were smiling, standing in front of a small, charming house with a porch swing. They looked happy. They looked whole. The report also mentioned he had a daughter, a 7-year-old girl named Lily. Eleanor stared at the file on her tablet, the sterile glow of the screen illuminating her face in the darkness of her penthouse. Her own loss, a wound she kept carefully hidden beneath layers of ice and ambition, ached with a sudden, sharp intensity. She knew the hollow emptiness of a life cleaved in two by tragedy. Her husband, Richard, and their daughter, Chloe, gone in an instant of twisted metal and shattering glass on a rain-slicked highway. She had survived. She had buried her grief under work, building an empire as a monument to her own emotional ruin. Thomas had survived, and he had dedicated his life to a small clinic, healing others in a way he couldn't heal his own wife. Their paths were impossibly different, yet they were united by the same profound, scarring loss. The next day, she returned to the clinic. She felt a strange compulsion to connect, to bridge the chasm between their worlds. As she was leaving, a wave of dizziness, a genuine one this time, washed over her. The sleepless nights and relentless stress had finally caught up. She stumbled, catching herself against the doorframe. Thomas was there in an instant. "Whoa, are you all right?" He guided her to a chair, his hand on her arm steady and reassuring. "You're pale. Let me get you some water." He returned with a cup and a granola bar from a vending machine. "Here, your blood sugar might be low." He didn't ask questions. He just cared. It was that simple, that unconditional. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The simple act of kindness felt so overwhelming, so foreign, that she felt a prickling behind her eyes. "Of course," he said, pulling up a chair. "We all need a hand sometimes." As they sat in the quiet of the closing clinic, a small girl with her father's kind eyes and a cascade of dark, curly hair came running out from the back room, a crayon drawing clutched in her hand. "Daddy, look. I finished." "That's beautiful, sweet pea," Thomas said, his entire demeanor softening as he looked at her. He turned to Eleanor. "Anna, this is my daughter, Lily." "Hello," Lily said, her voice shy but clear. She looked at Eleanor with an unfiltered curiosity that only a child possesses. "Are you one of Daddy's sick people?" Thomas chuckled. "Lily, that's not very polite." "It's all right," Eleanor said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Yes, I suppose I am." Lily stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Eleanor's face. "You look sad," she said, with the simple, devastating honesty of a child. Like in the movie when the mommy deer gets lost. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. No one had dared to call her sad in a decade. They called her powerful, ruthless, brilliant, cold, but never sad. The child's observation pierced through her armor with an ease that left her feeling utterly exposed. "My school is having a special day on Friday," Lily announced, changing the subject with childlike abruptness. "It's a Mother's Day tea party. But my mommy lives in the stars now. Daddy says she's the prettiest star in the whole sky." Eleanor's heart constricted. She remembered her own Chloe, saying almost the same words about her father. Lily looked down at her shoes, then back up at Eleanor, her small face serious, her eyes wide with a hesitant, hopeful question. "Will you be my mom for a day? You could come to the tea party with me. So I won't be the only one without 1 inch." The world stopped. The air in the small clinic seemed to thin, the flickering lights freezing in place. The request was so innocent, so preposterous, and yet it struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. A mom. For a day? The role she had lost, the identity that had been stolen from her, offered back by a small child in a faded brick clinic. Thomas started to intervene, his face a mixture of embarrassment and apology. "Lily, you can't just ask people that." "I'm so sorry, Anna," But Eleanor wasn't listening to him. Her eyes were fixed on the little girl. On Lily. and on the simple necklace she wore. It was a piece of blue sea glass, worn smooth by the waves, strung on a simple leather cord. A tiny, imperfectly drilled hole allowed the cord to pass through. Eleanor trembled. It was a tremor that started deep within her core and radiated out to her fingertips. Her blood ran cold. The necklace was identical. It was identical to the one her Chloe had made at a summer camp just a week before the accident. She still had it, tucked away in a velvet box, a sacred relic of a life that was no more. The sight of it, here, in this place, on this child, shattered the last of her composure. The past and present collided with a violent, disorienting force. For a moment, she wasn't Eleanor Vance, the corporate titan. She was just a mother, staring at the ghost of her own daughter's creation. Yes, she heard herself whisper, the word escaping her lips before her mind could protest. Yes, I'll come. The 2 days leading up to the tea party were a blur. Eleanor moved through her corporate life like a phantom, her thoughts a world away. The Titan Tower project, the board's looming deadline, all of it felt trivial, like a game played by other people. Her reality had been fundamentally altered by a child's question and a piece of blue sea glass. On Friday afternoon, she found herself standing outside Lily's elementary school, a brightly colored, chaotic place filled with the sounds of laughter and shrieking children. She was more terrified than she had ever been before a hostile takeover negotiation. She wore a simple dress, something soft and unassuming. It felt like a costume. Lily saw her from the doorway of the classroom, and her face lit up with a pure, unadulterated joy that made Eleanor's chest ache. The little girl ran to her and grabbed her hand, her small fingers warm and trusting. "You came. I said I would," Eleanor replied, her voice softer than she intended. The classroom was a cacophony of cheerful noise. It was decorated with paper flowers and lopsided hearts. Small tables were set with paper plates and tiny cups of juice. Eleanor sat with Lily at a table, surrounded by other mothers and their children. She felt a profound sense of unreality, a visitor in a land she was exiled from. Lily proudly introduced her. "This is my friend Anna. She's my mom for today." The other mothers smiled politely, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. They drank lukewarm juice from paper cups and ate cookies with too much frosting. Lily showed Eleanor her artwork, a vibrant, chaotic painting of a garden. And for an hour, Eleanor wasn't a billionaire or a CEO. She was just Anna, Lily's guest, a temporary mom. She answered questions about her favorite color and what she liked to eat for breakfast. She listened. She smiled. And slowly, painfully, a part of her that she had thought was dead began to stir. When it was time to leave, Lily gave her a hug, wrapping her small arms tightly around Eleanor's waist. "Thank you for coming," she whispered into the fabric of Eleanor's dress. This was the best day. Eleanor knelt, her eyes level with the child's. "Thank you for inviting me," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. She gently touched the sea glass necklace. "This is very beautiful. My mommy made it for me," Lily said simply. "Daddy says it's so I'll never forget the color of her eyes." The dam broke. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down Eleanor's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but not before Thomas, who had been waiting quietly by the door, saw it. He said nothing, but his eyes held a look of deep, knowing compassion. Walking back to her car, the world felt different. The gray mist had lifted, and the afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows on the pavement. The cold knot of grief in her chest had loosened, just a fraction. It was still there, but it was no longer suffocating her. The illusion shattered the moment she stepped back into her office. Marcus Thorne, her ambitious and utterly ruthless second-in-command, was waiting for her. He was holding a tablet, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Good news, Eleanor," he said, his voice slick with ambition. "I've solved our little clinic problem. Permanently." He explained the loophole he had found. A forgotten zoning ordinance from the 1950s, buried deep in the city archives. With the right legal pressure, they could have the clinic's charter declared invalid. They could have them evicted in less than a month. It was legally sound, morally bankrupt, and brutally effective. "The board is ecstatic," Marcus continued, oblivious to the storm gathering in Eleanor's eyes. "Sterling is already drafting a press release about our groundbreaking. You'll be hailed as a genius." Eleanor looked at him, at his expensive suit and his predatory smile, and she felt a wave of revulsion so profound it almost buckled her knees. He was the embodiment of the world she had built, the life she had chosen. A world where a place of healing was a problem, and a little girl's sanctuary could be destroyed for profit. She was standing at a precipice. On one side was everything she had worked for, the power, the wealth, the empire. Titan Tower, her cold, sterile legacy. On the other side was a small brick building, a kind man who gave away his lunch money, and a little girl who had asked her to be a mom for a day. The choice was so stark, so absolute, it was almost laughable. The old Eleanor wouldn't have hesitated. She would have congratulated Marcus, signed the papers, and never looked back. But the old Eleanor hadn't held a little girl's hand at a tea party. The old Eleanor hadn't been looked at with the quiet, understanding compassion of a man who had suffered the same loss she had. "Get out, Marcus," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. He blinked, the smirk faltering. "What? Did you not hear me? We won." "I heard you," she said, turning to face the window, her back to him. "I want a new proposal on my desk by Monday morning. One that incorporates the clinic, not destroys it. I want a plan to fund its expansion. Use Vance Corp's charitable foundation, and find a way to make it permanent." Marcus was speechless for a moment. Then he scoffed. "You can't be serious. The board will crucify you. They'll fire you, Eleanor." "Let them try," she said, her gaze fixed on the sprawling city below. "Now get out." After he was gone, a profound, terrifying calm settled over her. She knew what she had to do. It was career suicide. It was financial madness. It was also the only choice she could live with. That evening, she drove herself to the clinic. She didn't use a false name this time. She just needed to be near the one place that felt real. The lights were on, and she saw Thomas inside, cleaning. She almost drove away, but a force she didn't understand compelled her to stop. She knocked on the glass door. Thomas looked up, surprised to see her. He let her in, a questioning look on his face. "Anna, is everything okay?" She couldn't bring herself to tell him the whole truth, not yet. The lie of her name felt like a wall between them, but her turmoil was too great to hide. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Nothing is okay." He didn't pry or press for details. He simply looked at her, his gaze steady and kind. He led her to the small staff room and made her a cup of chamomile tea, the same scent that had greeted her on her first day. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," he said softly, handing her the warm mug. "You can set it down here for a while. It's safe here." His simple, unconditional offer of sanctuary was her undoing. She sat there, sipping the tea, the silence punctuated only by the hum of the old refrigerator. In that small, quiet room, she found the strength she needed. She knew her path. On Monday morning, Eleanor Vance walked into the Vance Corp boardroom. She did not look like a woman about to be crucified. She looked serene, resolute. She didn't present Marcus's eviction plan. Instead, she laid out her own vision. She spoke of corporate responsibility, of community, of building a legacy that wasn't measured in square footage but in human lives. She proposed the Vance Community Health Initiative, with a newly built, state-of-the-art Meadowbrook clinic at its heart. The board was stunned into silence, which quickly curdled into outrage. Sterling's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Have you lost your mind?" he boomed. "We are a corporation, not a charity. This is a betrayal of your fiduciary duty." "My duty," Eleanor replied, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity, "is to build something of value. And I have come to realize that value is not always reflected on a balance sheet." She knew they would fire her, so she preempted them. She announced that she was pledging $1 billion of her own personal fortune to endow the initiative, ensuring it could not be dismantled. Simultaneously, a full dossier detailing the board's predatory tactics and their plan to destroy the clinic was delivered to the city's top investigative journalist. She had set a fire she knew she couldn't control. The board voted. It was unanimous. She was removed as chief executive officer of the company her own father had founded. As she walked out of the boardroom, leaving her security pass on the table, she didn't feel loss. She felt an incredible, liberating lightness. She had sacrificed her kingdom, but she had reclaimed her soul. The story broke the next day, but not in the way the board had hoped. The narrative wasn't about a rogue CEO. It was about a billionaire philanthropist who had sacrificed her career to save a community clinic. Eleanor Vance, the Ice Queen of Finance, was recast as a folk hero. Public opinion surged in her favor. The board, facing a public relations nightmare, was forced to publicly embrace the very initiative they had fought to kill. Eleanor didn't watch the news. She was at the clinic. She had finally told Thomas everything. Her real name, her company, the reason she had come there in the first place. She laid it all bare, expecting anger, betrayal, disgust. Thomas listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When she was finished, the silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. "So you were never going to tell me?" he finally asked, his voice quiet. "I don't know," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I think I was afraid to." He looked at her, and she saw not anger, but a deep, searching understanding. "You were afraid of what you were becoming, and you were afraid of the person you used to be. I get it." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "You did the right thing, Eleanor. You lost your job, but you didn't lose yourself. That's a victory." Tears of relief streamed down her face. It was an absolution she hadn't known she was seeking. They stood there together, two survivors from different worlds, their bond forged not in boardrooms or balance sheets, but in shared loss and a quiet, mutual respect. Their victory wasn't about money or power, it was about integrity. 1 year later, the sun shone brightly on the grand opening of the new Vance Meadowbrook Community Health Center. It was a beautiful, modern building, filled with light and the latest medical equipment, yet it retained the same warmth and welcoming spirit of the old brick clinic. Eleanor was not on the stage with the politicians and dignitaries. She stood at the back of the crowd, next to Thomas and Lily. She was no longer a CEO. She was the full-time, unpaid director of the Vance Foundation, the charitable trust that now ran this center and a dozen others like it. Her office was a small, sunlit room on the second floor, its walls decorated with Lily's crayon drawings. She had traded her empire for this, and she had never been happier. Her sterile, empty mansion was no longer a mausoleum of grief. It was a home. Lily's laughter echoed in the hallways, and the scent of Thomas's famously bad cooking often filled the kitchen. They were a strange, patched-together family, building a new life out of the wreckage of their old ones. From the stage, the mayor mentioned her name, and a wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Eleanor felt Thomas's hand find hers, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a simple, grounding gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of everything they had been through. That evening, the three of them sat in the living room of her house. It was quiet, the excitement of the day having faded into a comfortable peace. Lily was on the floor, drawing with a set of new markers. She finished her picture and proudly held it up for them to see. It was a drawing of a man, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands in front of the new clinic. Above their heads, she had carefully written in wobbly letters, "My family." Eleanor's heart swelled, too full for words. She looked at Thomas, her eyes shining. He met her gaze, his own eyes full of a deep, unwavering affection. "She's right, you know," he said, his voice soft. "This is our family. If you'll have us." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, the word full of a certainty and joy she had once thought impossible. "Oh, yes." Later, as she was tucking Lily into bed, the little girl reached up and touched a thin silver chain around Eleanor's neck. Hanging from it was a small, perfect piece of blue sea glass, a gift from a jeweler who had replicated Lily's precious necklace. "It matches mine," Lily said sleepily. "Yes, it does," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. She leaned down and kissed the little girl's forehead, a gentle, maternal gesture that now felt completely natural. It was a kiss full of promise, a silent vow to this child who had saved her. She joined Thomas on the wide back porch. The night was clear, and the sky was filled with a brilliant spray of stars. He wrapped an arm around her, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she had not known since she was a child herself. In the distance, they could see the soft, welcoming lights of the clinic, a beacon of hope they had built together. They stood in comfortable silence, holding hands, two souls who had found their way out of the darkness. They had found more than just a second chance at happiness. They had found home.